Good afternoon. Oh, thank you. I'm David Ferriero. I'm the Archivist of the United States, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you to my house this afternoon. According to Alexa.com, the Internet Traffic Ranking Company, there are only 6 websites that Internet users worldwide visit more often than Wikipedia: Google, Facebook, YouTube, Yahoo, Blogger.com, and Baidu.com, the leading Chinese language search engine. In the States, it ranks 6th behind Amazon.com. Over the past few years, the National Archives has worked with many of these groups to make our holdings increasingly findable and accessible, our goal being to meet the people where they are. This past fall, we took the first step toward building a relationship with the online encyclopedia that anyone can edit. When we first began exploring the idea of a National Archives Wikipedia relationship, Liam Wyatt was the one who pointed us in the right direction and put us in touch with the local DC area Wikipedian community. Early in our correspondence, we were encouraged and inspired when Liam wrote that he could, quote, quite confidently say that the potential for collaboration between NARA and the Wikimedia projects are both myriad and hugely valuable in both directions. I couldn't agree more. Though many of us have been enthusiastic users of the free encyclopedia for years, this was our first foray into turning that enthusiasm into an ongoing relationship. As Kristen Albritton and Jill James of the National Archives social media staff met with the DC Wikipedians, they explained the Archive's commitment to the open government principles of transparency, participation, and collaboration, and the ways in which projects like Wikipedia in Residence could exemplify those values. The Wikipedians, in turn, described the ongoing effort to build collaborative relationships among cultural institutions such as galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, collectively known as GLAMs, and Wikimedia communities. These initial contacts led to the National Archives hosting WikiXDC, a meetup and birthday party for Wikipedia, attended by 90 local Wikipedians. Long a fan of Wikipedia, I was pleased to welcome the group to the archives, and even more pleased to read the tweets and blogs during and after the event. My all-time favorite: if it's good enough for the Archivist of the United States. Though Liam was unable to make it due to being asleep in Sydney, Australia at the time, he was nonetheless very supportive. As newbies to the GLAM Wiki collaboration, we're grateful for the encouragement and support of one of the movement's greatest champions, a graduate of the University of New South Wales, where he received the University Medal in History for his thesis, The Academic Lineage of Wikipedia. Liam regularly promotes the importance of open access to information at museum events around the world. He convened the world's first GLAM Wiki conference in Canberra, Australia in 2009, followed by an international conference in London in 2010. This weekend he organized GLAM Camp NYC, in which National Archives Digitization and Description team member Suzanne Isaacs and our first ever Wikipedian in residence, Dominic McDevitt Parks, participated. Liam is a longtime information access advocate. He's perhaps best known as the former Wikipedian in residence at the British Museum. He described the position on his blog, wikillama.com, as, quote, extremely significant as it represents a new way for cultural organizations to harness the educative and collaborative potential of the internet in a way that directly speaks to their mission as public collections to teach and share. Equally, it is a great opportunity for the Wikimedia community to get access to best practices and expertise to help improve its projects and ways of doing things, unquote. In January, the Wikimedia Foundation announced that Liam had been selected as a Cultural Partnerships Fellow, a year-long position during which he will continue his work building foundations for GLAM Wikipedia cooperation, and we look forward to being part of great things to come. Liam?
All right. Is this microphone on, or is it these microphones on? Well, we'll see. That's quite a. I'm honoured to have received such an introduction. The screen you're seeing at the moment is the anonymized data of recent edits to Wikipedia on the English language across both content and place. And it's not all of it, not nearly anywhere near all of it, but it can give you an impression of the variety of subjects that are happening right now. I like to use it as an example of how we can, whilst we can talk about social media, we can talk about access, we can talk about the theory of engagement with groups around the world, we must also remember that it doesn't happen once you leave the meeting room and then go and start work. It's happening live. And it's been happening live for 10 years now in Wikipedia. And you can either be part of the conversation or you can't. And I'm really pleased to say that NARA is now part of the conversation in a direct sense. So I'd like to talk specifically about, for the first moment, you still hear me? About the Wikipedia in Residence program I did at the British Museum. And then we can talk a bit more theoretically about the concepts of working with Wikipedia. Well, it would appear that's not going to work. Okay, the Wikipedia in Residence project started at the British Museum because they were the first ones to say yes. Fortunately, they're a fantastic institution that you're all familiar with, and it was by complete chance that they happened to be the first one to say yes, and I'm very, very pleased of that fact. The information about that particular project can all be found online at this URL, or by simply going to English Wikipedia and typing in the search box WP:/GLAM, and then looking for the British Museum project page. I can show you that a bit later. So all of this data, as with anything in the Wikiverse, is online, is available, it's transparent, including all of the statistics that we have. I sometimes get questions from cultural institutions or corporations asking to do a partnership with Wikipedia in exchange for our data. Just have it. Have the data. We have the only data we have, we share anyway. So it's not like you need to give us something in order to be able to partake of the information that Wikipedia has created, both statistical as well as the information on the actual site. The purpose of the British Museum project was to bring Wikipedia in-house to find ways of building a proactive relationship of mutual benefit without undermining the principles of either. Certainly every institution can do something with Wikipedia, can do something with free culture, but it doesn't require that there be a 100% overlap in policies and principles between these organisations. Obviously, well, I think obviously, if there is a 100% overlap between the principles of the Wikipedia community and the institution, then we'll already be working with them because they're both freely licensed in terms of copyright, they're both engaged in crowdsourcing online, wikis and so forth. So if Wikipedians are going to be ideologically pure and only work with institutions that completely agree with us, then it's a bit limiting. And equally, institutions have to recognise that while some elements of Wikipedia is scary and not necessarily what they want to be doing, it doesn't mean they can't do something. So the Wikipedia in Residence project and GLAM WikiWork in general has been controversial and scary for both communities. Both communities recognise and are quite aware of instinctively why it's scary for them, but they don't necessarily know why it's scary for the other. And it's been a task over the last few years of drawing in both communities to come a bit closer together, and the outliers from each cross over, which is very nice. And bringing those people in touch with each other is quite important. To summarise my project at the British Museum, and every project is different, I spent 5 weeks full-time at the British Museum. Some would spend 6 months, for example. It was one resident, I had no budget or pay. I ran 6 projects, specific projects. We had, by the end of the 5 weeks, or maybe a week after as well, 50 main page appearances of the English Wikipedia, which receives about 6 million page views per day. Obviously, there are 270 or so Wikipedia language editions in every language you know and have never heard of, but the English Wikipedia, unsurprisingly, is the most prominent. We had so much content, so much interest in working with the British Museum, merely because they invited us. By the mere fact of the British Museum saying we'd like to work with Wikipedia, and by the fact that they were the first to do so, the community at large became very excited and wanted to talk and share and engage with the British Museum. That's a really good, in terms of risk-reward, for very low investment from the British Museum's point of view. They got fantastic output. It was risky from their perspective, but the rewards greatly outweighed those risks. In fact, the greatest risk from their perspective was negative publicity or brand dilution from people saying, well, if you're the British Museum, you're supposed to be venerable and you're working with these people online. But in fact, it was quite the opposite. Everyone said, and we had a fantastic New York Times article, Venerable British Museum joins the Wikipedia revolution, which really brought it home that this is not a bad thing. Everyone likes to think that Wikipedia, they understand that it's not always accurate, but they personally are intelligent enough to be able to sort the wheat from the chaff, but we as a collective shouldn't be using it. And this kind of legitimization allowed people to come out of the closet as Wikipedia users, which was nice. We had increased quality, quantity, page views, and click-throughs. So both qualitatively and quantitatively, we could measure an improved relationship. And there are now Wikipedians in residence at the Smithsonian, the Children's Museum in Indianapolis, the National Archives of American Art, Sarah, resident, and obviously now also Dominic here. There are more institutions on the way. The Versailles, Palace of Versailles, has their Wikipedian in residence now. Derby Museum, a regional art gallery and museum in Derbyshire in England, has a Wikipedian in residence. And it was important to show, I think that that's important because it shows every institution, large and small, gallery, archive, library, can be involved in some way, shape or form. The concept derived from the GLAM Wiki conference, which was mentioned in the introduction, which happened in Canberra in 2009. This was the plenary session in Canberra, where one of the outcomes from that conference was the suggestion that we bring Wikipedia in-house to cultural institutions as a way of breaking down the barriers. We then subsequently ran GLAM Wiki in London and GLAM Wiki in Paris. At the British Museum, I ran 5 projects, as mentioned before. Most of them derived from the first project. The very important point for me was that I was not the Wikipedian in residence in order to write Wikipedia articles. The point of my being there was not merely to be an on-site editor. I may have written maybe 2 individual edits in the course of my time there to actual articles. The entire rest of my time was as an enabler of the experts and the Wikipedians, local and afar, to interact with each other as a bridge, as a matchmaker. Different places might do different things, and that's fine. This is the way I ran at the British Museum. The very first thing we did was the Backstage Pass tour. I believe you've done this here as well. The concept of bringing people in-house, have a meeting, in the first photograph, that's Anne van de Kamp, with the lady with the glasses on the right-hand side. She's the curator of Dutch prints and drawings at the British Museum, showing a collection of Wikipedians. This is Dürer's original woodblock. And the Wikipedians were saying, fantastic, that's really exciting. This is the kind of thing that's not normally on display. And then the second half of the day, we did the reverse. The Wikipedians talking to the curators saying, this is behind the scenes of our institution. The really important part of the Backstage Pass days, and we've run them at a variety of institutions, is not the first nor the second half of the day. They're just the bait to get both sides of the communities to come along. The value in these events is lunch, because that's when the 2 different groups can actually sit together in a casual atmosphere and bounce ideas off each other and break down the barriers of, you're an expert, you're in the Ivory Tower, kind of break down that barrier, and in reverse, you're just a volunteer online and you live in your basement and you don't have a job. We'll break down that one as well. And from these days, all sorts of other good ideas that both communities thought were their own kind of come to the surface. The 2 that were the ongoing, the most thoroughgoing and self-managing were the one-on-one collaborations and the photo requests page. One-on-one collaborations was effectively the personals or matchmaking service, whereby individual Wikipedians wrote to me and said, I want to have some assistance in this subject or object that I'm interested in, and I'd like some expertise. And so we can see Sweet Track is an object. Sweet Track is the original, the earliest known wooden plank construction of a road. It was over a bog that it ended up being preserved in peat. That was the earliest we have anywhere in the world of a constructed bridge or a pathway, which is quite fantastic. That now has a Wikipedia article because we put that Wikipedian in contact with the curator and they could geek out about it. Equally, we had subject areas. Cycladic art, or Cycladic art, is not an individual object. It's not inherent to the British Museum like Rosetta Stone or Cyrus Cylinder are objects in the British Museum. But equally, they have expertise in-house about Cycladic art. And the British Museum, thinking in terms of enlightened self-interest, wants to make sure that its references, its academics, its footnotes are the ones that are used. If an institution has a collection of Roman coins, they are never going to be the only resource out there for Roman coins. But if they get their footnotes and their experts used in Wikipedia, they'll damn well be the most visible collection of Roman coins around. So there is an egotistical angle to it as well that's quite compatible with Wikipedia. We are what you might call intellectually promiscuous. We'll take whatever comes along. And if someone is the most active at sharing their knowledge with us, we'll go with them. And at the bottom, you can also see a section called Curators Seeking Wikipedians. Some individual curators didn't want to edit themselves. They're busy, they've got stuff to do, but they have this object that they wrote about 20 years ago for their thesis, and they think it's really cool, and they know the books, and they know all the research, and it's not visible online. It's not on display. No one knows about this thing except them. They're the expert in this thing. Wikipedians, being intellectually promiscuous, if we found the subject, we found a person who wants to share, we can find a Wikipedian who'll work with them. And in fact, the article, where is it? Admonition's Scroll is a Chinese story on a scroll that was very poorly represented online and had a lot of contesting ethno-nationalistic debates about it. A lot of British Museum objects have some fairly heated debates about who should own this stuff, where should it live. And the British Museum curator said, yes, I understand there's some politics about that. That's why I don't want to write it myself, but I want to provide all the resources about this because it's an important thing. And can someone else write about it? I'm not going to own the article, I'm not going to take control of it, but I want it to be shared. And so that is now a feature quality article, which is our top peer review assessment, which is extremely thorough. That article didn't exist before. And Isabella Brandt is this portrait here, is the first wife of Rubens. I think it's Rubens. He made this drawing, it's just a quick drawing, and it's in the collection of the British Museum. And they discovered, in conserving it, that actually on the back side of the drawing is another drawing of his second wife, standing there with his first wife's children, which is a really interesting story about this object and the history of the painter and the family around it, which no one knew about. And that's now a feature article as well. And you can get some fantastic, detailed, really obscure information that knowledge professionals love to collect. Everyone has the thing that they studied and just are really excited about. And no one else knows about it, and that's fine. But they can share it on this platform in a way you cannot do merely by having physical exhibition space in a building or a website with 50 million archival record collections all equally buried. Wikipedia's great advantage is in contextualization. The second one was the photos requested page. British Museum allows photography in its building. Many institutions don't, but the British Museum does. They were not willing to share their own images of their collection with us, which we would have loved, but that's okay. They didn't want to, and we weren't going to not work with the British Museum because they didn't want to share their image of the Rosetta Stone. I obviously lobbied for it, but it's not a make or break issue. So people were asking questions and crowdsourcing photography requests. International people were saying, you're on site, or you're a local London-based Wikipedian, can you go in and take a picture of this particular Jade B, object number 90, which is in room 33. And they were crowdsourcing the photography of the collection because they were really interested in these obscure things. Not the kind of stuff that you might actually have in the postcards in the gift shop. These are not the cool objects, but this is, for example, a Easter Island moai. It's the big Easter Island statues that you might be familiar with. All of the pictures that you can find online, and even less of them that are online and with a freely available copyright license, were of the front. Everyone knows the picture of the front of these things with the big nose and the empty eyes. The back is really important, which you might be able to see in this slide. There are circles and lines etched into the back of this moai statue, which are the only remaining remnants of the original Easter Island tattooing culture. And there are some original anthropological documents of the few Easter Islanders who were still around when Europeans visited the island, who talked about these markings, but there's no pictures, there's nothing. This is it. And that's not expressed anywhere in the British Museum's online photography catalogue. So now, that photograph of the British Museum object is used in the Wikipedia article tattooing, which is the kind of contextualization you would not normally get if you're only thinking in terms of object record to article. Secondly, that was just happening in its own right. That was just ticking over, and I was assisting in the connection of these people. The second thing we did was the feature article prize, where we said, all right, some people edit because they really like subject X, but some people edit because they've been encouraged to be involved. It doesn't matter what it was, but they will, if you can provide a little bit more incentive, they'll go over here instead. So I said, okay, British Museum will give 5 people, all groups, £100 gift vouchers to the British Museum shop for the first 5 articles in any language that reach that language's feature article standard. Now, there are some flaws in that argument in that it does, to a certain degree, encourage Wikipedia editing for commercial gain, which was a criticism, but equally, you're getting a gift voucher. So it's not like, it's not going to support you through college, you know. And the British Museum is basically giving money to its own shop, so it's not losing money in that sense. And it was in any language. We wanted to encourage the fact that British Museum content and Wikipedia content is available in multiple contexts. It's not merely English. It's a global project. The smaller the project, the less rigorous the feature article standard. English being the largest has the most rigorous feature article standard, but I figured that would even out. You know, there's more people editing English, so more people could potentially win, but they've got to work harder to win it. In the end, we had Royal Gold Cup, which didn't exist at all, which is pretty much as an article, which is on display permanently, but it is pretty much the only piece of remaining medieval European crown jewels. And it's French. And that was in the English Wikipedia article. We had the Latin Wikipedia one for Rosetta Stone, Tabula Rosetana, which some criticism was, what's the return on investment for that? You know, it's Latin Wikipedia. Who is going to read this? Not many people. I think it's kind of cute that it's in the Latin Wikipedia of all subjects. Rosetta Stone is kind of appropriate for that. But the guy who wrote that is English, he's British. He went on to translate his work from the Latin Wikipedia and all the footnotes he found into English Wikipedia. He translated from Latin into English the work that he'd already done, and now Rosetta Stone is a feature article in the English Wikipedia. And as a result, not surprisingly, it's their most famous object, is the most individually visible thing in all of the English Wikipedia to do with British Museum. And it cost the British Museum a £100 gift voucher to their own shop. millions and millions of people are seeing this. This comes up higher. When you type in Rosetta Stone in Google, we come up before they do. So it's in their best interest to make sure that that information is good. And they can do that a variety of ways. This way is one of them. Great Wave of Kanagawa in Spanish. Epifania de Michelange in Catalan. And Benin Bronze, a collection of bronze plaques that were nicked from Benin in Catalan as well. The Catalan community in Wikipedia is really active. One, because they're a coherent group, they meet each other a lot and they're engaged and they're excited. But B, because they want to make sure that the Catalan Wikipedia is better than the Spanish Wikipedia. Cool. If that's your motivation for sharing knowledge, go for your life. We then said the other way around. The feature article prize, and by the way, these 5 projects are the 5 projects that I came up with and could run in the 5 weeks that I was there. There are many other kinds of projects that someone who's staying at the institution for longer could come up with and run over a longer period of time. There's no right or wrong answer. There's no canonical list. This is just some examples. Hoxton Challenge. We said the reverse of the feature article prize. That was you pick a topic and we'll support you, but you run it. And if you are the first, then you get a prize. Hoxton Challenge was no prize, but it was we pick the topic and we focus everyone on that. The Hoxton Challenge referred to the Hoxton Hoard. Hoxton is a town in England where the largest ever collection of Roman gold and silver coins and jewellery was discovered in about 1992, if memory serves. This is the picture of the reconstructed box of some of the jewellery. It's not all on display, but this is part of that's on display. Case about this big, extremely valuable. None of the big silver plates that you see in other things like the Mildenhall treasure, but you can assume that if this was as rich as this box was, there were probably other boxes that have subsequently been lost. This was a really rich family. And we said, okay, the catalogue, the 20 years in the making catalogue has just been published this year. All of the experts are in-house, the metallurgists, the geologists, the Roman experts, the Celtic, English, like the whole shenanigans. Everything is on site. All the knowledge, all the books, all the footnotes, all the experts, all the collection is there. And yet the online information is abysmal. There is a very poor Wikipedia article, about 3 sentences long. There is a British Museum Explore the Collection record, which is the kind of entry-level fun page for the cool stuff. That's about half a website page long, saying come along and see it, it's in room 33. But all of the academic, all of the detailed information is either in a book that 20 people are going to buy, ever, or in the collection records management system, where every single individual coin or spoon has a record that's in the archival context of here's the archival record of the existence of this coin, item number 3012. It's not collated anywhere. There's no overarching, there's no place on the British Museum's website talking about the Hoxton Hoard. So we said, let's do this. How long does it take to get an article from nothing to fantastic? And we said, let's do it in a week. Let's see if we can get this article to feature status in a week. I will announce it on a Friday. We'll have an in-house event next Friday where we get 20 Wikipedians and 20 experts and some of the objects that are on display, and I will lock them in a room with coffee and Wi-Fi and see what happens. Right. And it was really quite astounding what we did achieve. We didn't achieve feature article. Well, eventually we did, but we didn't achieve feature article in 24 hours. But we did achieve, hopefully this runs, this is a time-lapse video of the editing process on that day, where everyone's coming in and they're moving around and they're sorting out the books and they're breaking off into little side teams and they rearrange the tables. This is the afternoon. In the morning we did a tour, and in the afternoon we come in here and we're, right. And now, okay, we've decided, we've worked out the plan, now we're breaking up into groups. They're working on coins and they're working on the geographic context. And then a third group breaks off, and here's a guy, the curator, the keeper of the collection, doing a little dance on the left-hand side. The lady in green keeps wandering back and forwards. She's the one who wrote the book. And so this is 20 people who, the week before, had never heard of this thing, who spend the entire day deeply involved in this collection, in this content, and this. It's truly extraordinary. It's like history on steroids. And you ended up with the Wikipedia article, Hox and Horde. Actually, let me first show you what the Wikipedia article looked like before this challenge was announced. It was about, there we go, 2 paragraphs long, 1 footnote to the British Museum collection record, 2 further readings, and fine, okay. The current revision has, look at the sidebar here. Right. That's the contents page, archaeological history, point 1, point 2, point 3, items, point 2.1, 2.1.1, burial historic context, acquisition, display and impact, see notes. It's been translated into French and Italian and Arabic as well. Maps, beautiful photographs, and a list of, every single item is footnoted, list of individual objects. Many of the related articles, like the articles about individual Roman coin denominations, now exist as articles in their own right. So there was a kind of an ecosystem of articles around this that developed out, an ecosystem of Roman trade with Britain in this period is now an article. Coins, this is where all the coins were minted, tables of which coins came from where. This is demonstrating how coins were clipped around the edges to melt down, to get the raw silver melted into new coins and try and pass off the original coin as still full value. Some of the jewellery, pull quotes. These are all the inscriptions on the spoons. This is, we think this is a toothbrush. And then if you get to the end, you look at some of the footnotes. Nearly all of these people are British Museum curators, and they're British Museum publications. So John's, what? Okay, well, I think this is working now. John's, Bland, Guest, they're all curators of the British Museum. We've just given them the biggest possible plug for their books that you could ever get. And if they're published by British Museum Press, that's advertising for their sales catalogue, if you want to think of it in that way. So let me move on a bit. Is this working? No, okay. Then we also did a translation project, where this was a French high school that was coming to visit for a school visit to the British Museum. They were coming to England as part of their summer program, learn English trip together. They came to the British Museum and I said to them beforehand, okay, I'll give you the 10 most important articles about British Museum objects that don't exist in the French Wikipedia. And you will, on the trip over in the school bus, in groups, translate the opening 2 paragraphs from English into French and then hand that into your teachers. And they did, and it was something they could practice English and research, and some of the objects were French historical objects, so they were learning about French cultural history anyway. And then when they got to the British Museum, the teachers gave me their compiled sheets and corrected and so forth, and we could upload those articles. We did it for them, upload those articles to the French Wikipedia. They're 2 paragraphs long, not particularly efficient way of writing 5 Wikipedia articles of 2 paragraphs long, but it meant that those students would then went around the British Museum finding the objects in the collection that they just spent the last 3 hours writing about. And so it made a real digital reality crossover project. And then they could then go home and look at the content, look at the assignment that they'd been writing and show their parents and feel like the work that they'd done, their schoolwork, their school assignment, their homework was alive. And people were actually reading it. And crumbs, I better make sure that my English is good now. People spend much more time working on school assignments when they know someone's actually going to read it. If it's not going to be read once by the professor, marked and then handed in and thrown away and put under the bed. If the work is actually published for all the world to see, they'll spend a lot more time doing it, even if it doesn't get an equivalent more grade point value associated to that assignment. So they were the 5 or 6 projects that I ran. Some of the statistics that came from this were quite impressive. In blue, you see the page view, the combined page view numbers on the English Wikipedia, not German and French as well, which were quite significant, just the English Wikipedia, brought down by 2 orders of magnitude. So that spike in about April 2009, that's 1 million page views. 1 million page views in April, 1 million page views in May. I'll come back to why there's a spike there. But you can see that over the corpus of British Museum articles for the previous 2, or articles related to the British Museum, so not Rome or not Egyptian history, ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt clearly has a relationship to the British Museum, but it's not a subject that's inherent to the British Museum. Rosetta Stone, Elgin marbles, these are inherent to the British Museum, but the Parthenon is not inherent to the British Museum, if you see what I mean. So this is the combined page view numbers in blue for all of those articles that are categorised as inherent to the British Museum, month by month. And you can see that when I was there in June 2010, we ended up, over the course of 1 month, doubling the organic page view numbers and doubling the number of articles that were categorised and related to the British Museum. More people were aware of the British Museum project within the Wikiverse, and so they were thinking, oh, I'll link to that, and I'll help out with this, and I'll translate that, and it became much more, there was a momentum. And so we doubled the number of people who were actually looking at this stuff, which is a valuable thing in its own right. But then we also had the red line. Red is the click-through statistics from the from the Wikipedia articles, anywhere in Wikipedia, to anywhere in the British Museum website. So red is from their own analytics. We publish the blue line, we publish all of our data. Red is data that they gave me. So you can see that, on average, about 5,000 people would click through from Wikipedia to the British Museum in any given month, somewhere. But by the end of my time, we're ticking up, and the next month after that, and next month after that, we're ticking up to 10,000 people. We're getting spikes, not 10,000, we're getting spikes double the original lows, and an organic number that's increasing. And that's not Wikipedians, that's visitors, that's readers who have no idea there's a relationship between these 2 organisations clicking through. We want people to leave Wikipedia. Many websites want people to stay and don't have external links. We consider anyone who leaves Wikipedia by a footnote to be a satisfied customer because they've found what they wanted and they've been able to be directed to more information, like a reference desk librarian. If someone comes to the reference desk librarian and is still there 20 minutes later asking more questions, that's not a satisfied customer. If they've come, they've asked the question, they've gone, thanks very much, and they've gone and found the book that they were after, that's a satisfied customer. We want to send people to your original materials, to your collection records. The spike in both blue and red, but particularly blue, in April 2009 is for one article, the crystal skull. Crystal skull is an object. It's a fake Mesoamerican or Central American skull that was created. Are any of you aware of this object? There's 3 of them. One of them is in the British Museum. But it's a fake. It was a 19th century recreation that was sold to the British Museum as this great find. And it looks like that. And it's on display, but it's hidden away in the corner because it's actually a fake. But it's really cool. Right? And the British Museum were unaware of the fact that in April and July, in 2008, that was receiving 1 million page views a month. And that, moreover, there was a spike. There was a number of people were clicking through to that article on their own collection record from Wikipedia. The reason there was that spike is because that was the month that the film Indiana Jones and the Temple of the Crystal Skull was released. And millions of people were Googling crystal skull looking for the session times, probably. And they were coming to Wikipedia. They probably clicked, I'm feeling lucky, came to Wikipedia, and the article about the object. And many of them probably went, oh, that's not what I wanted. I want to go, and went to the film. But clearly, several thousand of them who previously were not looking at the article, this is the red spike, were not looking at that article, probably didn't know that article existed, were so interested that they went and clicked through to the British Museum's catalogue record for that object, which is a fantastic conversion in 2 clicks from pop culture session times to British Museum collection record database. And there's no way you can get those people, the British Museum, without doing a massive PR campaign at the same time as the film is launched, buying bus shelter advertisements saying, we've got the object that film is vaguely related to. So we can do some really weird things. So the point of all of these projects that I did, all of them were about improving content. They weren't about marketing or advertising the institution. They were about the educational principles of the encyclopedia, knowledge. They focused on personal relationships. None of these were mass upload things. We've done mass upload projects which are fantastic with both metadata, with text, with multimedia. We've got lots of projects of mass uploading and mass creation of articles and mass importing of metadata formats and things, which are brilliant. But none of these were that. It's not obliged. All of these were about communities, the community of experts in-house, communities of Wikipedia on-site, local, and global. None of these were about me. None of these, although it could be a resident doing the actual work, writing the articles, and that's fine, none of them actually required me to write the text itself, because people in Wikipedia land were, once they'd been invited, once they felt valued, they engaged automatically. It's a volunteer community, and anyone who's worked with volunteers knows that it's not about paying people. You don't pay someone and then the work gets better. You pay them in a sense of trust and a sense of value, that their contribution matters. Every institution could do something. It's not obliged to do it this way, but you can do something. So I think at that point, I could go into some more theoretical elements about, especially about the copyright of Wikipedia, which are of great interest to Wikipedians, but potentially not great interest to anyone else. If you'd like to talk about copyright, please ask any Wikipedian ever. It's now 2:15. We've got how long? Till about 3:30 or 2:30? Okay, so we've got a lot of time. Does anyone have any? Oh, it's an hour later. Okay, sorry, the computer's wrong. Does anyone have any questions on that, or would like to go into greater detail of a particular area, an area you think I might have missed, or like to talk about what can be done in the NARA context? It's being recorded, so if you could go up to their microphone.
So the British Museum expressed interest to have you come in the beginning, but when you say the British Museum, was that like the higher-ups, or were there little people on the ground who were interested? And either way, did you have trouble convincing the people who were going to be actually doing the work to work with you?
The particular person that I was working with was the head of the website department, so within the Department of Communications and Audiences. His name is Matthew Cock, and he is awesome for having agreed to stick his neck out and do this thing. In some circumstances, in some institutions, it comes from upon high, but in this circumstance, it was a division leader. It's important to have someone in an institution who will be willing to back up and actually sign on to the project, and that the institution in some way, shape or form has buy-in. We were expecting, both he and I were expecting there to be a great deal of reticence, and indeed the risk assessment process for before they formally invited me to come there took 6 months. Right. and in which time I didn't even know they were doing a risk assessment process. I'd asked, and they said, we'll get back to you. And then 6 months later, they said, you're on. In the meantime, he was behind the scenes fighting away because it was the first time, and as I said at the beginning, the biggest risk that they could come up with was negative publicity. In the end, there was only positive publicity. There was lots of it, and it was all good, which broke down a lot of barriers, and a lot of other institutions, most notably the Smithsonian and, who was it? I think especially the Smithsonian, rang up my boss and said, how did you get a Wikipedian? We want a Wikipedian. If you can do it, we can do it. So if jealousy is a motivator between institutions for doing cool things, then great. And that's why I'm particularly pleased to promote the British Museum as the first people to have done this, because that's cool. Does that answer your question?
Hi. I was curious of the so many objects at the British Museum, there's so many ways you could have gone, how you came about deciding on the 5 you decided on. I mean, there's just such a wealth of material. What did you use as kind of your criteria or the serendipity that brought you to the projects you decided on?
So those projects that we ran were, what am I looking up? Those projects that we ran were by and large projects suggested and agreed upon in a vague sense at the backstage past lunch. So there was no point in me, especially within 5 weeks, to try and pitch, sell, win over people to do projects or in departments that just didn't want to be involved. It was try and find the low-hanging fruit, and other people will then come on board when they see the project. So I wasn't there trying to bash down the most tricky thing. So that's how we decided on those 5 projects. The other way of, in terms of the 5 articles that won the feature article prize, they were self-chosen. Wikipedians just started writing articles, and the first 5 to say, I win, got the prize. The other thing we did was this assessment. In Wikipedia land, we have what's called wiki projects, wiki project libraries, wiki project arthropods, wiki project bacon, I kid you not, who collect and categorize in terms of quality and importance the articles in Wikipedia related to that subject area. So in June, I did that for the British Museum. I found all the articles that existed related to the British Museum and categorized them. There were 148, you probably can't read the small number, but there was 148 English Wikipedia articles about the British Museum, give or take a few that I might have missed. And I reassessed all of them to be of top importance, so the article British Museum, the article Rosetta Stone, the article Round Reading Room, things that you would probably, the things that are the most important if you want to understand the British Museum, that's top. Then high importance, I classified 22. They vaguely would be the things that you would pick up in the fire if you were having to run out right away. What would you collect? What would be the desert island objects? Which 20 things must you have if you're going to save the collection? It's a bit arbitrary, but I tried to categorize them in terms of core and low importance were things that were related to, but not inherent to the British Museum, not really important. So there is an old, there's a few books that I talk about the British Museum. There's an old tube station called British Museum that's now closed down. It was used as a bomb shelter. Now that's definitely related to the British Museum, but it's not important to the British Museum. That's how I classified it that way. And then vertically, quality, that we have quite extensive peer reviewing systems for feature article, good article, B, C, start, and stub. These are the levels of arranging of peer reviewing in Wikipedia. That quality assessment is not visible publicly, but you have to click on the discussion page, on the talk page. Every article has an article and equivalent discussion, and that's where that assessment is kept. So I could see that in the initial assessment, okay, that's not going to work. In the initial assessment, there were 2 articles that were stub and high importance, which we didn't know beforehand. It had never been mapped out in this matrix. So I said, I found people who were interested in those articles and said, I will focus my attentions on you first. because this is the thing that's of greatest need, where the least effort will bring the greatest reward. And that's how we could try and divide up the work a bit. By the end of it, you'll notice there are now 262 articles, so we created lots of new ones and also found some other ones that hadn't been categorized properly. There are still only 30 stubs. So despite the fact that we doubled the number of articles, the proportion of articles that are of very poor quality decreased. So we were able to increase qualitatively and quantitatively. And there are no stub high quality articles. We even got a top feature quality. That's Rosetta Stone. That's that Latin translation. So we tried basically to push everything to the top left-hand corner. Does that answer your question? How are we going for time? Another 5 minutes. Yes, could you come, or someone could take the microphone out and pass it down the line?
You talked a little bit, you mentioned something about the copyright issues, and I'm kind of, since no one else, I'm interested in that.
Fantastic.
Sorry, guys, but...
So, copyright in 5 minutes. The Wikipedia is the free encyclopedia that anyone can edit. And when we say free, we mean it in two senses. Is anyone familiar with free software, open source software, Linux and so forth? When they say that, they mean it in two senses of gratis and lieb. Free as in speech, free as in beer, free, no cost, and free as in speech, freedom, abilities to do what you want. Wikipedia and all of the Wikimedia projects, everything we do, our software, our statistics, our content, is free in both senses. So we cannot, despite the fact that we're a non-profit volunteer organisation, we cannot accept anything that has a non-commercial restriction on it, or a non-derivative restriction on it, or a for Wikipedia use only restriction on it, or a for educational use or personal use only restriction on it. Right? Do you understand why that? We don't want to stop anyone from taking Wikipedia content and putting it in their own project, which may or may not be commercial. Indeed, what defines commercial is extremely vague. Cost recovery, is that commercial? Ads down the side, is that commercial? We don't want to stop anyone from using our information in any way that they might do, as long as they attribute where it comes from, as long as they don't pretend that we support what they're doing. That's a trademark, that's a branding issue. And as long as any changes that they make, this is what's called the share alike clause or the viral license, any changes they make down the line have to be shared under the same terms. So you can't take something that's free and then restrict it again. What is public stays public. So on the spectrum of licenses that are available for Wikipedia content, Wikipedia use, here we go. Oops. We accept a few licenses, but not all. Everything we have has to be able to be used. Everyone can use it and enjoy the benefits of using it. So it's not restricted by which language you're reading or whether you're paying more for it. You must be able to apply knowledge acquired from it. So if you make some fantastic commercial product, if you win an award or gain a degree using Wikipedia information, Wikipedia-derived information, we're not going to come after you and ask for a royalty cut. That we must be able to have the freedom to make and redistribute copies in whole or in part. We must be able to make derived works and print it out and hand it to your students. In Australia, educational use, printing out and handing to your students, is considered a commercial use. Right? And the school department has to pay a royalty fee to the National Museum. So the education department pays via a collections agency, which keeps its 20% cut, or 15% cut. The culture department robbing Peter to pay Paul, private company gets money and education is worse off as a result. So a lot of the time, Australian institutions use American or overseas or BBC content because it's free. And so Australian school students have to use foreign information because it's cheaper. That's not cool. So on the spectrum of copyright licenses, copyright is a spectrum of all rights reserved. You can't do anything without asking my permission. That's the default. You create something that's of intellectual value, you get all rights reserved by default. You don't have to apply for it. Many people think you have to apply for it. And then the other end of the spectrum is public domain or all rights expired. Copyright has expired. And the amount of time it takes to get to expired depends by country. It's generally 70 years after the death of the author, which is a long time. And if the original purpose of copyright is to encourage the creation of new cultural works by giving you a temporary period over which you can commercially exploit that work to basically be able to repay you so you can eat and make new cultural things, then having rights over that 70 years after you die doesn't encourage you to make new works. All it does is encourage your family members to not work. Or the Disney Corporation to not let anyone else make derivative works of Brothers Grimm stories. Brothers Grimm, this is what I mean by the viral clause. You take Brothers Grimm tale, it's the public's, it's the world's cultural heritage. You make a derivative work of it in a Disney film, that's now copyrighted. You can't make your own version of Snow White that riffs off or derives or mashes up Snow White in any active way. You can make a blog post or something that's minor, but if you actually try and sell as a mass commercial object something that's derived from the Snow White story, Disney Corporation will come down on you and say, no, we own Snow White. I thought that was collective cultural heritage. No, it's Disney's cultural heritage. So it used to be 50 years, it's now 70 years after death, also known as the Mickey Mouse Extension Act. So in the middle are several Creative Commons licenses. Creative Commons, everything that's Creative Commons is in copyright. It's not an anti-copyright regime, it's a permission in advance copyright regime. You don't have to come and ask for certain clauses. And what they've done is said, here are 6 different ways in which you can give permission in advance. From the more restrictive at the top, so Creative Commons attribution, non-commercial, non-derivative. That is, you can use it, but you have to attribute where it comes from, you can't use it for commercial purposes, and you can't make any derived works, you can't change it. Obviously, because of those freedoms I described before, we can't accept that in Wikipedia. We must allow commercial reuse, or potential commercial reuse, and we must allow people to change it. It's a wiki after all. Then it comes down. We accept these bottom 2 of Creative Commons licenses. Attribution only, so we can copy it and paste it and integrate it as long as we attribute where it comes from, fine. And attribution share alike. You can copy it and paste it and attribute it, and every change down the line must be equally available under that license. So all of Wikipedia text, the entire corpus information, can be used for whatever you want to do with it, as long as if you make a change and you mash it up and do something really clever, that you can't then go and put a C circle logo on it. And that's why a lot of cultural institutions, in America you have the fantastic fact that everything federal government is public domain from birth. But in most countries, cultural institutions, public cultural institutions, sit in the non-commercial area. They're allowed to use it, but only for non-commercial purposes, and we can't touch it, which is really a shame. Australian politicians have to, when we want a photograph of an Australian politician or Australian prominent figure, often we can only use photographs when they visit the White House, and the official press photography, federal government agency, public domain, we then take that photograph, crop the person out, use that as their portrait. I can't go to my Australian Parliamentary Library and get the official portrait of my Prime Minister, because the official response is we will keep this as Crown copyright, all rights reserved, to discourage satire.
I wanted to ask course of your work and dealing with national governments, have you come up with your own list of, well, I'm just saying maybe 3 or 5 of the best or the most cooperative governments, and then, you know, your list of the worst? I was wondering in particular, did you have a special analysis of the National Archives here in the U.S.?
The National Archives in the US has the fantastic fact that everything is public domain that's made by an American federal government institution. So that really aids the fact that you, by law, are allowed everything to be downstream use. I used to work for the Australian Legal Information Institute, AustLII, which publishes all of Australia's laws online, integrated, so a lawyer can look up, or anyone in the public can look up the law without having to buy the big, the textbook. Australian laws are Crown copyright. So they're all rights reserved for the duration of the existence of the Crown. The Crown doesn't die. Right? The Crown, long live the Crown, long live the Queen is dead. The Crown doesn't die, so Australian law technically is always fully copyrighted, and technically that means the Australian government can legally stop you from copying it and distributing it. I mean, they're not going to, but it's on the books. So the American government, and this is a reason why Wikipedia and all of our servers are based in America, is the best in terms of public domain. By far. The public domain by default is the best law in all of the world in terms of government information. Then you also have the quite reasonable laws about safe harbours, that YouTube and Wikipedia and Google are not responsible for things that happen to have come through those services, and they will respond via DMCA takedown notices quickly, but they don't have to act preemptively to potentially remove content. We have extremely active deletion and libel checking and review processes, so we will actually delete libelous material in advance or copyright violation material in advance, whereas Facebook and YouTube and so forth will only take material down when someone complains. We're the only people who give 2 hoots about copyright on the internet, which is why we are so anally retentive about copyright when it's restricted, in order that we can stand up and put our foot down on things that are actually free. And when someone tries to claim rights over, for example, scans, here's the Mona Lisa, and it's a 300-year-old painting or how many 100-year-old painting, and then you try and make a faithful reproduction of it and then claim copyright in that. I'm sorry, you don't get copyright in Mona Lisa.
Even with what you're saying about Australia, wouldn't it be one of the better countries or
it's one of the better
in the
ones.
world? And I mean, would you put like China, Cuba, North Korea, I don't know, Saudi Arabia, would they be among
we're certainly not going to put our servers in China, Cuba, or North Korea. There's no ranking. At least we don't make a ranking. Probably Reporters Without Borders or similar organisation would have a ranking of internet freedom. We're the only organisation, sorry? Freedom House. We're the only organisation that I know of in terms of the most prominent 100 websites that doesn't have a China feed. So you go to Google, you get a different result than if you, in China, than you would elsewhere. We provide the same information to China as anywhere else in the world, and if China wants to do something at their end, well then we can't stop them, but we're not going to actually give different information because Chinese government says so. Ultimately, we are responsible to the American government, but we do try very carefully to look after every country's copyright law. So we take the host country, America, and the country of origin, France, Argentina, Australia, whichever one's copyright law is stronger, harder, longer, and that's the one, as a matter of policy. Legally, we only have to follow America, but as a matter of policy, if a French student is looking up a photograph by a Frenchman on a French Wikipedia article in France, then he should feel, he shouldn't have to be worried that that's going to be not following French copyright law. Does that answer your question? I think we're out of time. Thanks very much for coming along. If you'd like to know more, about anything to do with cultural institutions and Wikipedia, go to glamwiki.org, glamwiki.org, and that takes you to our homepage for all this information, which we've been greatly improving over the last weekend, that has model projects, case studies, success stories, how to get started in all of this, how to edit Wikipedia as an individual, and contact information for local ambassadors around the world. Thank you very much for your time.